We are talking today with Ben Sherman. He is author of the book Medic, the story of a conscientious objector in the Vietnam War. Ben, thanks for coming in today.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
If we could start, could you tell us what was the motivation in writing your book Medic?
Well, I was quiet about the war for a long time. 10 years after I got home, I think I got back in 70, and it's around 81, right after the inauguration of Reagan. I think the hostages were released from Iran. They'd been captured a long time, and there had been a lot in the news about them, and they came home and got a great ticker tape parade down Avenue in New York, and it just angered me. And I was writing for a local newspaper where I lived in Georgetown, Texas at the time. I was what they call a stringer. I was just writing editorials when the editor was tired. And she asked me to write an editorial on the very day that this happened, but she didn't ask me to write about that. In fact, nobody was really paying much attention. But I was a vet, and I'd done a little bit of work with some veterans down in Austin, and most of them were in alcohol rehab, and I was a medic in the service, and I was doing some work down there, sort of extending my medic thing. And boy, when I saw the lives of these people, and when the Iran hostages, I was just angry. I was just totally insulted by our country throwing a parade for people who, I feel differently about it now, but at the time, I felt like these were people who were going to Iran for business. They were there for financial reasons. The State Department had warned them against going to a hostile area. They got captured, they got abused, they got tortured, whatever. But I didn't see them as American heroes that deserved a ticker tape parade. I saw them as just business people who had left their families and to make money. And here I was drafted and sent to Vietnam, and I got no parade. And so I wrote this article, Where's My Parade? And it was scathing. It was ugly. It was just, it was a rant. It was the worst possible rant. Very similar to what a lot of people typically think of Vietnam veterans as these terrible, angry people running around the forest. Well, here came this rant, and I've looked at it since, and just, I don't want anybody ever to read it again. But the interesting thing, at that time in history, and coming right off the inauguration and all that, the response in my small town was that our editor got people coming by with letters and actually delivering them in person to be sure they got in the paper the next Sunday. And by Friday of that week, she'd had over 100 letters. She said it was the most she'd ever had responding to an editorial page thing. And they were mostly favorable. They were mostly saying, where's my parade? Why have we dissed these Vietnam veterans so much? So because of that experience, and it was kind of humorous because I call the editor, my nickname for her, for Linda, is Scoop, because she called me Thursday morning after her paper came out on Wednesday with my editorial in it. She called me Thursday morning and said, have you seen the national news? And I said, no. She says, well, there are veterans all over the nation are writing articles and writing letters, and they've got all these things about the mad Vietnam veterans and where's my parade? And she says, so we scooped the national news with our little hometown biweekly newspaper, you know. So we laughed about that, and I call her Scoop. But that led to, because of the response and because of a lot of conversations, that was the first time I ever talked about Vietnam. And that led to actually sitting down and writing my first draft and going through old notes I'd had. And it was, for me, mostly therapy. It was mostly seeing this ad and then being a little embarrassed about it. I mean, I lived in this tiny town, 11,000 people, and everybody who would talk to me in the store or whatever, and, I saw your article, and, gee, I didn't even know you were a Vietnam vet, and they'd get in this whole conversation thing, and kind of just embarrassed me. And I thought, gee, Ben, if you're that angry, you probably need to figure out where that anger is coming from, and how has that affected other things in your life. And so I just started writing, and wrote for 3 or 4 months, and whenever I had a chance, I just wrote. That was early, and that was before I was married. I was single, and I had time, so I did a lot of writing, and then I just left it alone. Didn't even bring it out for another 10 years. But I got it kind of all out of me and thought, okay, then that's great. That's therapy's done. Didn't have to pay anybody for it. And then about 10 years later, about 1990, 91, I pulled out all these papers. And at the time, when I had written it the first time, I didn't have a computer. This was before PCs. So all of it was done on a Lexicron word processor. And I had only the manuscript. I didn't have any electronic backup. So because all of the technology had changed. In the meantime, I learned how to use a computer and did everything on word processor. So I had to literally retype 450 pages and start back into this thing. And I've got stacks and stacks of papers at home. So anyway, that's how it started. Long answer to a short question, but
part of the story itself is your experiences in Vietnam as a medic. How did you get pulled into Vietnam?
Well, I was drafted. My draft board was Sacramento, and I had applied to be a conscientious objector with my draft board, and they denied me, and I appealed the denial, and they voted against me, and so I got drafted. And when I was in the service, I explained to my basic training captain that I was a conscientious objector, that I wasn't going to shoot anybody. And he said, well, this is just basic training. You just all you have to do is carry around an unloaded weapon, and if that's okay with you, then you won't cause any fuss. And when you get out of basic training, you'll get a school. You'll get your what's in the military called an MOS, military occupational status. And then, if you get truck driver or something, you'll be fine, or clerk or cook or something. And I said, okay, great. So then of course, at the end of that 10-week basic training here at Fort Lewis, I got infantry, of course. That's the way it works. So I went to my infantry captain the first day I was there and said, here we have this problem. And he was actually a pretty cool guy. He said, you make sense here, and there's really nothing I can do about it. I can't change your status. I'm not the Pentagon. And bummer that you got drafted, but our options are very few. But I can see your point. I mean, I don't want you being in my platoon carrying a weapon. If you're out there trying to decide whether or not you're going to shoot somebody, that's not the kind of guy I want in front of me with my life in his hands. And I would much rather you were a medic or a radio operator or a clerk or something. So let's just see what we can do. And so he sort of fumed about it a little bit and talked to a couple of people about it and came back and said, there's just nothing. And the commanding officer said the only thing that will get him out of training as an infantryman is to refuse an order, and then he goes to jail. So when he told me that, I said, okay, so no options. And then I was out on the pistol range in about my second week of training, and was looking at a target, right, like 20 feet in front of me that looked like my cousin Ernie, and I just said, okay, I don't really have a cousin Ernie, but I said, all right, that's it. And I just put the pistol down in front of me on the little pedestal and stepped back and said, not doing it. And the captain came out to the training area, and all the training stopped, and all the people went over to one side, and the sergeant was threatening me, and the captain gave me an order 3 times and added witnesses each time, and finally the MPs came and took me and dragged me off to jail, and I stayed in what's called a holdover barracks. I mean, they call it that because they don't want to call it a jail, but it has bars on the doors and the windows, and you don't go out at night. Fortunately, because the captain was sort of on my side, he let me work in the orderly room for him as a clerk typist, and I learned to type, and I spent my time, a couple months there at Fort Lewis, that could have been really miserable. I spent it working every day for 12, 14 hours a day, because I didn't want to go over to the barracks and be with all the sort of the weird folks that were living over there for all sorts of reasons. They were in this holdover barracks. And and then my orders came through from the Pentagon and granted me status as a conscientious objector. I mean, it's very rare to get that when you're in the service. I mean, when you're already in, it's very rare. But I think partly the letter that my captain sent along with it, and that I was willing to work and I was willing to go to Vietnam, And I was being a good clerk typist and behaving myself and not really being a protester or anything. I think he helped me. But I got orders and I went to Fort Sam Houston. I took training for 10 weeks there as a medic, field medic, and then found myself on a plane going over to Vietnam about 2 months after my cycle had already moved over there. So that's how that happened.
And was it in your training that you discovered you actually excelled at medic
Oh yeah,
type?
actually, I broke the record at Fort Sam Houston. It's kind of a funny story. They have these points that they give, and the points are tests, like written tests that you take and field tests that you take, and then physical training. And I wasn't the top of my class in physical training. I was in good shape. I'd played soccer in college and stuff. I was in great shape, but I was good enough. But I maxed every test. I got hundreds on all my written tests and hundreds on all my field tests, and I broke a record that had been at Fort Sam Houston since, I think they said 1955 or 54 or something like that. I have a letter somewhere from my commanding officer that said, "Congratulations, you're graduating with honors. You've broken a long-standing record." Yada yada. They made a big deal about it at my graduation. And then I was in Vietnam, and a guy joined our company, a guy named Gordon, who had actually been in the holdover barracks back at Fort Lewis. And he got orders 2 weeks after I did, and I didn't know he was even a medic. And he'd gone through the cycle 2 weeks after I had at Fort Sam Houston. I never saw him because he was in another part of the camp. But I ran into him just coincidentally in Vietnam. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I heard that you broke the record." I said, "Yeah," I was all proud. And, "Yeah, I did. Ha, ha, ha." He says, and I said, "Well, how'd you find out?" He said, "Oh, they said it at my graduation because a guy in my cycle broke your record." And I went, "Oh, jeez." And so, my record lasted for 2 weeks after one I broke that had been around for 30 years or something, 20 years. So anyway, that was kind of a funny story about old Gordon. I said, "Well, thanks a lot. You could have gone all day without telling me that." But yeah, I was a good medic, and I knew my stuff, and I knew that for my survival, the sergeants in our platoon told us, you'll do these things that you're taught because they're routine. We're going to practice them so many times that you don't even have to think about it, because when the bombs and the bullets start flying, you're going to be just working off of memory and just sort of like rote. You're just going to go to this because you've done it so many times. And he was right about that. He was truly right about that. Last thing he said to us was, "You'll do everything you've been trained with, tears in your eyes and your heart in your throat." And boy, was he right. I didn't even think about the actual movement of my hands. I didn't. It just came to me that there was a need to work rapidly and get it done because there were a lot of casualties, and we needed to get them ready to get into a helicopter and get out of there. So, yeah, they gave us pretty good training there.
And that was something you put to use almost in the first seconds of your arrival in Vietnam. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I was on a commercial airline, and when we landed at Bien Hoa, we were under attack. And this big, huge jumbo jet slid sideways. I've never happened. It was really scary because it was a huge jet, and it did what you would do in your little car. If you're trying to avoid an accident, you slide sort of. And they lost control of this jet. And as soon as it hit the tarmac, they threw the brakes on harder than I'd ever experienced, and the plane actually slid on a kind of like a four-wheel slide going to the right. And as soon as they got the stairs down, a guy came running in and said, "Incoming," and we were under attack. And I got to an old sergeant, and I ran across the tarmac, and I got to a bunker. And he'd been there before. He'd been to Vietnam before, so I sort of followed this guy because he knew what he was doing. And as soon as I got in the bunker, somebody had hit their head, and I was helping a guy with I think he bumped his head coming into the bunker. He wasn't wounded by enemy fire, and so immediately, I didn't even have a bag. I didn't have any supplies. There was another medic there that was handing me stuff. Out of his bag. He was a guy who was actually going out. He was leaving country as I was coming in, or at least I thought he was. And and so he was handing me bandages and stuff. So yeah, I was literally on the ground 30 seconds and was already using what I'd been taught, and not even thinking about it, not considering whether or not I was doing it right or anything, just helping a guy with a bumped head. Facial wounds bleed really a lot, so he didn't have a very bad wound, but he was a tall guy, he's like 6'6", and he hit his head coming into the bunker and opened his forehead up. And so, of course, his whole face is, full of blood, and it looks terrible. It was nothing. It was just a little, scratch, but it looked really a lot worse than it was. But yeah, it was pretty interesting that I hadn't even signed in yet, yeah, and didn't have any supplies. Just was in my khakis with my orders on my lap, and here the plane were under attack when we got there.
So you went from there to your first duty was working on a ship. Is that right?
I was assigned to a base camp called Dongtam, and my first duty was in the morgue. This clerk said all medics get the morgue, and it's the way his term here. It's the way we pop your cherry. So it was the idea that they didn't want any medics out in the field that were going to get crazy if they saw dead people. So I spent 3 days putting bodies in rubberized plastic bags. That was my first job. And then I was assigned to a medical company. Something changed after the Tet Offensive in the Mekong Delta, where the guerrillas and stuff were. They had found that medics and first lieutenants and radio operators seemed to be getting shot by snipers more than anything else, and it's a real sniper war in a guerrilla area. It detonated, what's it called? Command detonated mines, meaning somebody's watching you coming down the trail and they actually hit the trigger and blow you away, or snipers who can pick out who they want to shoot in a platoon. And medics were the number one to get shot, and the purpose of that in a guerrilla warfare is just to demoralize the troops. They can't shoot all of you, so they got to pick somebody, and they want to pick the one that has the most chance of demoralization, and that would be if they could find a lieutenant. And of course, the lieutenants aren't always obviously the lieutenant, because they don't wear their gold bars or their gold or their silver rank on their collar. They wear blacks for that purpose. So and it might be just one of the platoon, but medics are pretty obvious. Medics don't carry a whole lot of ammunition, and a lot of us didn't have weapons. And we're carrying a very noticeable medic bag. It doesn't have a big red cross on it, but it looks different than the rest of them. So here they were losing all these medics, and because of the demoralization to a troop who'd gotten to know their medic, and the medic kind of becomes mom and doctor, and it's the person who changes socks and has all the salt pills and is there to save your life if you get injured. And so you get attached sort of to your medic. Well, by the time I got to Vietnam in '69, they had just changed it that they put the field medics in this company kind of as an experiment, and they assigned them out to the platoons in pairs, but they exchanged the pairs. So no two medics stayed with the same platoon. They would only go on one mission, and then it would rotate. And that also put the medics not in the field all the time. It put them on, my company had a rotation of, we worked in a what's called, we didn't call it a MASH unit, but I think the listeners would understand it best by a MASH unit, a mobile hospital with a surgery unit and a ward, and that was on a ship called the Nueces, a Navy ship that was sailing up and down the Mekong River, big troop carrier ship. And then the second thing was medevacs, and we would be assigned to the hospital or then to medevacs, or then the third thing was the field. So we moved those three things and were never attached to one medevac unit or one field unit. We rotated in and out. And it was explained to me that this is in an attempt, just because Viet Cong knew who was who. I mean, they knew everything that was going on around us. That this was an attempt to save the lives of medics so that they wouldn't be targeted as the morale killer if you get the medic, because the medic was always new to each platoon. I don't know how well that worked, but that was the reason why I had 3 jobs instead of just being in the field all the time. Why they put me in that kind of a situation. And as I understand it from talking to other medics, that was only where I was. That only was happening in Dong Tam, and it was only happening in one medical company. Another guy explained to me that I kind of got it wrong. He said, no, that was actually because so many medics had been killed that they just made up this whole company of medics so that they could keep throwing them out there, keep supplying them. I don't like that story. I like my story better. But anyway.
So what was it like first experiencing Nueces?
Oh, the ship?
Yeah. Was that kind of cushy compared to the other stuff that you experienced?
compared to being in Dong Tam in the morgue tent and living where there were rockets and mortars coming in nightly 2 or 3 times a night. Yeah, the Navy ship was great. They had great food. It was cooler as you got down in the decks, the second and third deck down to where we slept. There was actual air conditioning, and just the fact that it was underwater and it was just cooler. And where we worked in the triage was really hot and uncomfortable, and the surgery out in triage was really hard. I mean, it took 2 guys to sponge the doctor and 1 guy to sponge the operation. But yeah, that about the Navy ship was pretty well. I felt a little more secure on the ship. They had these big anti-aircraft guns on fore and aft, and they would spin around and fire into the forests all the time. I felt like I was just a little bit more safe. I wasn't running to the bunkers 2 or 3 times a night with incoming rockets and stuff. So yeah, I liked the Navy ship a little better. I wasn't on it very long. Also, the food is great. I mean, steaks for every meal, and Navy eats well. A lot better than the Army.
I'm wondering if we could cover your the stay that you did have in the morgue, because that is a fairly intriguing story, and it seemed like it was really the beginning of your experience there in Vietnam.
Well, I don't want to give the book away, but I will say that the morgue duty is, the military, the morgue is run by the quartermaster. The quartermaster is the supply sergeant or the supply area, supply company. So they're the ones who take care of blankets and toilet paper and medical supplies and all the typing paper and all the stuff that the Army needs. I think with the exception of food and ammunition, everything else that supports the troop is handled somehow by the quartermaster. Well, it was interesting to me that the morgue was part of supply, that when a person dies, they now become something that needs to be shipped somewhere, rather than a live human fighting soldier. Now they are so much property that the Army needs to, in essence, get rid of. They're part of the waste product of the military effort. They're no good to anybody anymore. They need to be dispatched. Now that may be an awful way to look at it, and I apologize to people who have lost loved ones. I don't want to diss them at all. In fact, my reaction to that was horror and disbelief that the quartermaster. I mean, I wanted the medical corps or a chaplain, to be taking care of dead bodies. I don't want the quartermaster doing that. That's the guy that handed out toilet paper. But no disrespect intended at all. When I got into the morgue, my few days that I was there were 2 tall, lanky medics who were working there, and they didn't say much. And it was hot, humid. It was a tent. I mean, it had wood sides on it with sandbags around the sides, but it was a tent. It was canvas, and the sun was beating down on it. And inside, you had the smell of disinfectants, and the other smells that go with dead bodies that come with the body as they come in, and that includes everything from human waste to just the dank of the swamps and the dirty socks and the sweat and the everything. And so it wasn't a very nice place as far as smell was concerned. And then all this disinfectant is trying to cut through it. That just made it worse as far as I was concerned. But they had the tables, and they were preparing bodies for shipment. And the idea, I guess, behind this, or at least these two guys who were working in there when I got there, was that when this body got home, they didn't want some more hometown mortician opening up a mess. So they were very diligently cutting off uniforms that were soiled, putting on, they had a whole stack, there were shelves at the side of the tent with new fatigues in them, sort of by size, that came right over from supplies. So mostly fatigue shirts, but in a couple of cases pants where there'd been a leg wound or something. We were taking the clothes, so we're stripping these guys, and we were literally putting on new underwear, new fatigue pants, fatigue shirts, counting out everything, their dog tags, their change in their pocket, or the bills or whatever was in their pocket, Lucky Charms, pictures of people, just stuff that they had into a bag to make sure, and we inventoried all of it and put a list in the bag so that someone at home would know, and we cleaned them. I mean, we mopped them up. We cleaned between their toes, between their fingers, behind their ears. Wiped all of the mess off of them if they were bloody or dirty, and then reclothed them, and if there were wounds or whatever, we patched them so that they wouldn't leak more, and then put them in a bag and zipped them up, put the little paper bag between their legs, and zipped them up, zipped this thing up over their face. It was priestly work. I don't know how else to explain it. It was touching to me that this was going on in there. And then the bag went into a coffin, a aluminum box. It was attached in 4 places, I think, and then sent out back to be in a unit in the back that the generator was running and keeping it refrigerated to at least a degree so that the bodies wouldn't be too hot in the sun of the Vietnam afternoon. And then periodically, every other day or so, someone would come by with a truck and pick up all the coffins and take them down to the landing strip there and ship them home, and to go back to Benoit and be put in a big cargo plane and then shipped home with that scene of the coffins with the flags draped over and all that. All happened after we were finished. We didn't do any of that stuff. They did that at the debarkation station in Benoit. So that was kind of what was going on in the morgue. It was interesting work, and set the tone for the whole war for me. And I would say, of all of the images that I had in the war, and I was really scared a lot of times and saw stuff I didn't want to see, but I think of all the images, I think those first 3 days in the morgue are probably the one, seeing each face and seeing people who look just like me and just studying them as we were cleaning them up. I would see stuff. I'd see a scar on a guy's forearm and think, I wonder, did he break his arm, or is that a sports injury, or because to me these were just people, and their faces, they look like me. I mean, they were young. They had this look on their face like, oops, like what happened? It's interesting how about the dead and about what they look like. I mean, it kind of gets you. They don't look different than you, so it makes you think, gosh, this could be me very easily. Especially the age. I mean, they're so young. See a guy with straight teeth. I mean, much straighter than mine. I mean, perfect teeth. And I think, did this guy have braces? And how long did he wear them? And what did that cost his parents? And now what? What a waste. I don't know. Maybe I'm just weird that way, but I was personalizing each of these guys. I I wrote notes and stuck them in the bags. At first it was just good luck and smooth sailing, see you in the world, and I'd make little promises, like I'd look at somebody's dog tags and I'd say, I'll never forget this person's name. Of course, I forgot it in a day. I mean, I don't have that kind of memory, but I'll find this person. I'll find their hometown. I'll go visit their grave or something. I'd make myself promises like that. And I didn't keep any of them, but I made them because I was trying to do something to make it a person rather than a human loss, rather than just a piece of equipment that was being shipped somewhere. And I got to writing like notes to the parents at home or whatever. And, hi, I'm Private Sherman. I'm working in the morgue, and I'm very sorry for your loss, and I'd be interested to know about this person's life. I care about this person. I'm sure they're a wonderful person, and I'm sorry, and stuff like that. And I'd fold it up and throw it in there, and I'd give them my APO address and tell them to write me and tell me, what was that. I don't know. I feel now like maybe that was an invasion. Maybe I was stepping over some intimacy line, and that maybe I shouldn't have done that. I didn't get any replies, of course. Who knows if anyone ever saw the note. And then people tell me, oh, no, that's not an invasion. That was a good thing to do, and somebody probably really cared on the other end. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. I feel like it's an intimate moment when someone goes to visit their hometown mortician and see this son that they sent off to war, and now they're there in a slab, and they open the bag up and see all their little private things, and then they find this note, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I did it. Didn't get any replies.
Your description in the book was one of the resources, one of the memories that came to me when recently we had a brouhaha in our local media from some photos taken by a local photographer of the caskets on a plane over in Iraq. Many of these caskets, and the White House had, gotten on this photographer saying that was totally inappropriate for you to photograph this. And there was a large uproar over that, mainly in support of the photograph and the photographer, because to me it showed people who were giving great care to fallen soldiers, and it just made me recall that those passages from your book that reinforce that, yes, this is one of the more respectable parts of these wars we engage in, is these people that end up caring for our fallen soldiers.
Yeah, I remember that. It's easy to. It's just too easy to pick on this administration and wonder why they do things. I thought they were probably doing that because they wanted to hide the fact that there were losses. Well, that's coming from my side, of course. I asked the mother of a guy who's there now. She's actually a Vietnam veteran herself. She was a medic in Vietnam, same time I was. And her son's there now. He was recruited as a 17-year-old in high school without her knowledge, and he went off when he was 18, and he's in Iraq now. And I said, "How do you feel about this casket thing?" And she said, "Oh, why is this government or this administration of this government opposed to respecting the losses?" And that was her response. I don't have an answer for that. To me, to see, it's just truth. There is loss. If I were, let's just take it to, everybody always, my draft board, everybody else, they always say, well, war is necessary in some cases. And if you start to argue about any particular war, they always draw back to Nazi Germany. Like, would you stand up in front of Hitler? I got in a lot of trouble with my draft board because they asked me that question, and I asked them, if you were a German during World War II, would you have been on the draft board? Oh boy, they didn't like that at all. In fact, they really hated that. They didn't laugh. I thought it was a good joke, but they didn't laugh. But so I want to just reverse that. I want to say, okay, if this was World War II and if our boys were going off to fight Hitler, would you say that we can't show the coffins coming home? I don't think so. So the same argument that the Hawk side would use to say that stopping Hitler and the Germans in World War II was a just war, was a just cause, the same mentality glorified, put crosses in Arlington. I mean, everything we could do to show the sacrifice that people made. So now why is it that not only do the peaceniks and the liberals think that the war in Iraq is wrong, is absolutely wrong. It was wrong in its conception. It's wrong today. And that every life that's lost there is another indication of how wrong it is. I mean, that's the peacenik liberal side. What about the Hawk side? Why are the Hawks saying, we don't want you to see the losses? We don't want you to even respect. And that we think crosses in a field are put there by people who disagree with the war, rather than assuming that they're put there by people who agree with the war and are honoring the people who have gone over there and sacrificed their lives. Now, why is it that they make that assumption? I don't have an answer for that, unless they know in their heart of hearts that it is wrong, they're wrong, and that they're going to do this anyway. They're going to do it because they have a whole other agenda. Or, in their heart of hearts, they really don't respect the losses. And for people to put us in harm's way who have never been in harm's way themselves, that would make sense to me. That the losses that are don't matter to them. That's what my conclusion is. And otherwise, they would glorify those losses and say these are heroes, and that these heroes should be honored in every way possible, rather than swept under the rug and acted like they don't exist. Am I off there? I don't know.
Talk a bit about your first time in the field. You went from being on the Nueces, I believe, to then going out into the field. Was that a dramatic change?
Well, we were all crowded into a little boat. Everybody was just packed with weight. I mean, the things that people carry out into the field, it's just unbelievable. And I wasn't. So right off the bat, I felt completely conspicuous. I mean, I had two bags. I had my backpack that had all, clothes and all my personal stuff in it, and then I had my medic bag, and my medic bag was packed, I mean, doubly packed with a bunch of stuff. So it wasn't like I didn't have stuff to carry, but I didn't have a weapon and grenades and ammunition and, all that stuff. I was carrying extra socks, and I had extra water, and I was sort of walking along as this little infirmary. But so right off the bat, I felt different. And I caught these guys who I didn't know. I'd never met the people in my platoon. The only one I knew was my sergeant, who was the other medic. And so right off the bat, I was very conscious that there were a lot of eyes on me. And as soon as we had our first casualty, and I actually performed my job as a medic, all that changed. Then everybody knew my name, and everybody was sharing stuff with me and talking, and, then I was in. But that wasn't until I proved that I had a reason to be there and that was okay. And no one ever asked me about the weapon thing, except my sergeant, except a fellow medic. He mentioned it, but no one ever mentioned it. It just didn't come up. There, a lot of medics never use their weapon. And in some cases, it's just in the way. And I know that I've heard from other medics that they gave up their M16 and carried only a handgun and put it on a holster because they were so busy. Their hands were busy, and they didn't have if they laid it down somewhere and then had to carry somebody somewhere, they'd have to go back and find their weapon, or someone else would have to carry it for them, and then they have to carry all the ammunition for it. And it was just it was a hassle because that wasn't their job, and they didn't need to do that. Now that's Southern. Remember, there's kind of two wars in Vietnam. There's the Southern Mekong Delta guerrilla war, where everything was search and destroy missions, where you go out looking for the guerrillas. In the North, that was a more traditional battle. I mean, this was an air battle and tanks and lines and the Vietnamese regulars coming down and taking over an area and a hill or something, and then our guys going out. So I wasn't there. I wasn't in the North. And a lot of what I say is from my experience in a war that was really different from the war that people fought up in around the DMZ and up there on China Beach and places like that.
But the part you participated in a lot of ways is similar, again, to what people are experiencing in Iraq, is my impression.
Oh yeah, in a lot of ways a more urban way. They're going house to house and they're seeking out places where people are hiding arms or hiding, where the enemy is, and history just repeats itself. One of the things that I believed in the Vietnam War coming out of that, and it was in my book at one point, and I don't know if I think it's still in there. A little bit of it's in there, but not the whole thing. But this guy Che Guevara, who helped Castro do the overthrow of Cuba, well, he took his show down to Bolivia, and there's a book, Che, that about this, and I think our military, the people who are the strategists when it comes into an insurrection like this, ought to read Che's book. They ought to read that before they read Patton or Rommel. They should read about Che, because the very thing that won him Cuba lost him Bolivia. He went to Bolivia and they didn't want his show, and they gave him up. I mean, the populace did not support Che's talk, his communism talk of the power of the people and take over the government. And I think, I'm not really sure about this because it's too long ago, I can't remember. I think our CIA helped, or they did it themselves or something, but they took him out. I mean, the people told him right where he was, and it wasn't a problem. I mean, once he got to Bolivia, it wasn't a problem to go find him and take him out. Well, history just repeats itself. I mean, Nicaragua, same thing. El Salvador, same thing. When you're working against the populace, against the people, and if you try to use a traditional war, if you go hand to hand out there in combat, you're working with people in their neighborhood. And you're working with, maybe there are only, think about our neighborhood. Think about where you live. Well, there may only be 10 teenagers out there who would actually go and do the fighting. I think in northern Italy, I think there's also, not Italy, Northern Ireland. There are all sorts of examples of this. So let's say 10 people in your neighborhood are actually the insurrection. They're the ones who are fighting. Well, they come to your back door and want food, or they want to hide in your garage. Who are you gonna support? The people who you grew up with, who live in your neighborhood, or these people from a foreign country who come in and don't look like you, don't talk like you, don't know anything about you, don't speak your language, don't know your religion, don't know what's sacred, don't do nothing but disrespect you and take you outside and shake you down every time they come by the neighborhood and treat you like you're the enemy. Well, who are you going to help? It's not rocket science to figure that out. So what do I think about Iraq? I think we're fighting the whole country, one way or the other. Are they? And the way we picture them is that there's these few radicals who are holding on to this old regime. Well, the parallel to that would be if someone attacked America and the only people defending us were the KKK or the Aryan Nation, or, would we support the KKK in fighting? I don't think so. Those aren't. That's different. Those aren't our neighbors who we grew up with. These are radicals out there, and we would probably point them out and say, yeah, take them out. We don't like these guys. They always were nuts, and they embarrass us. It wouldn't take long to find who they were, where they are, and take them out. Now this, I can just imagine some military person listen to this and say, oh, he's so naive. But maybe we need to be a little more naive. Maybe we need to just look at it for what it is. From what I hear from the veterans who are talking to veterans, I belong to Veterans for Peace, I don't mean veterans, but active duty people who are talking to their parents and who were seeing their letters come home, and it's not that they're being disloyal, it's not that they're not doing their job, it's not that they're not hoping that they can finish in Iraq, do a good job, restore the country to the Iraqis and get out of there. It's not that they don't hate what was going on there before, but when they talk about the war right now, today, it sounds like the common denominator is this is way, way more than we thought it would be. This is the whole population. This is not a small group of terrorists or of, like what we would call radical fanatics, like the skinheads or something. That this is not that. This is the whole population who when they are polite to us, it's because they fear us. It's not because they respect or they want us to help them. It's because they fear if they're not respectful that we will literally kill them. So
A lot of people have pointed to the similarities between Vietnam and the situation in Iraq. Do you think that's a fair comparison between the two?
well, I just made it. I just leaped off of Vietnam and got right to it. I think that history is repeating itself. The one hope that most Vietnam veterans had, whether they were doves or hawks or liked the war or hated the war, was that we learned a lesson there that wouldn't be repeated. And for that reason, I'm sick to my stomach. It means that all of those people, those 58,000+ who died in Vietnam, to me, and now we've just disrespected what we learned there because we have gotten right back into the same thing. We got there on a big lie. We're staying there on bigger lies. Same thing that happened in Vietnam. A lot of people said this was the first time that we ever had a war that we started. Not true. I think the Gulf of Tonkin lie is right up there with wars that we started based on a lie rather than the truth. So we're right back at it again.